Hello, this is Wyatt Pierce with SVAD150 Cloud Foundation. I am presenting my capstone project for Module 8. Before I get started, I just want to say that I am turning this in a day late. It is my hope to still accumulate some grade, even if it's very little, but if I am unable to be graded at all, that is completely okay, I understand. I still learned quite a bit from this project, and I feel confident in some more abilities than I did before. Okay, so here's some issues encountered during the project. First of all, I did use the AWS Learner account for the entirety of my project, so there were some limitations on the account. So when I was asked to enable multi-factor authentication, I was unable to create a new user or edit my own root user. I'm not sure if I was just doing this wrong, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't, because I went back to some old hands-ons and followed the instructions in those, and it worked for me for those hands-ons, but it just didn't work for this one, and I'm not sure why. So I supplemented by showing this is where my multi-factor authentication status would show up. I was able to get to the creation screen and see, like, hey, this is where you set up multi-factor authentication, but once I hit save, it would tell me, sorry, you don't have permission for this Learner Lab account to actually save those changes. So I kind of knew what I was doing, it just didn't let me do it. Over here, I also did the S3 bucket. I was able to create that and add some sample website information. Here's a screenshot of that running over here. This is actually a local instance, because I was unable to set up public access, which was very strange, because in one of the other hands-ons, again, we did this exact same process. So I literally went back, downloaded the instructions for that, and followed them to the letter, and yet I still got an error saying that I was unable to set up the policy properly to enable get access to that index.html object in the bucket. As you can see here, here's some of the errors that I was getting. I just couldn't save the changes. I'm unsure why this was happening, even though it worked in the previous labs. The only other thing with the S3 bucket, if I just come over here to my instructions real quick, come up to the top. Let's see. Here you will be able to see that it says there was provided some sample website data. I believe it's right. I don't know where it's at. Hold on. Sample website text. Here we go. Sample website text from Capstone Project 8. Now, I could not find this for the life of me. I never saw any sample website text provided in any of the module pages, so I supplemented by just creating my own little simple website, since I've done that before in some of my web development classes. So here's the local one that I made here. It's just some very simple HTML and CSS. I said a little bit about what I'm doing in the class, who I am, what I learned, what I'd like to learn. So serverless computing, I've heard a lot about that. Anyway, this isn't my actual email, by the way. I can just show the code for this as well. Over to terminal code. You can see some of the CSS and HTML. I hope this is adequate in light of the fact that I'm not using the sample text as the instructions stated I should. I just was unable to find the sample text. So, that being said, let's get back to the presentation. Like I said, the bucket policy, this is what I would have put according to the other instructions. This should have worked, but it just didn't. Here's a picture. All right, now let's get to the deployment overview. This is the big part. So as you can see here, actually, I'll show you the actual diagram in Draw.io. So we have the public virtual private cloud and the private virtual private cloud, and just the VPC up here, VPC down here. Each one has their own subnet, and they're connected via the Capstone peering connection. Now, in order for this to work, each subnet needs to have non-overlapping CIDR ranges. So I do have that set up properly. Each one also has their own compute here, which is the virtual machines that I was able to log into through RDP. Only the public subnet has access to the internet gateway, naturally. And for some reason, again, I'm not a network or cloud major, I'm a software development major, So I wasn't super familiar with this process, and I'm not sure if this is what I was supposed to do, but I did add this elastic IP address here, and oh, that took me somewhere. Sorry. I did add this IP address, and it seemed to work once I set that up. I followed a tutorial online, but I'm not entirely sure why I needed this. It kind of makes sense to me though. So yeah, then that's coming out to the internet gateway. And then the security groups, each one of these is set up to control like inbound and outbound traffic through the RDP protocols, as well as, let's see, what's the other one? RDP and ICMP, as well as a couple other things. So yeah, there's a security group on each subnet. I also have these routing tables. In draw.io, I'm unable to edit the addresses here in the routing table image. This is just a graphic, so these aren't the actual numbers that I used. But you know, I did have that as well in the final deployment. So yeah, then in terms of the peering connection, this is the requesting side and this is the receiving side. I don't think it matters too much, that's just how I set it up. I figured I'd mention that. Here you can see the firewalls. Now, this is the only thing I'm not 100% confident in. I do not believe that I placed these correctly, but this seems to be generally how the firewalls work, so I think this is the right positioning. These kind of just use a similar kind of access control list system that the security groups are using. I think it's connected somehow. So, you know, when I'm making a ping request, the ICMP isn't really on the public. Oh, sorry, this is labeled incorrectly. Private. There we go. It's not enabled for the private, but it is for the public. So this one's able to make the request out, the echo request through the command line, and get a response from Google's server, while the other one is not, which I'll start showing now. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So let's move on. Here you can see, that, like I was saying, the elastic IP address, the security group rules. Here's some infographics of the security groups, inbound and outbound rules. I did set up RDP for my IP address in particular. Oops. And then the CIDR ranges. So ignore these ones that are blank. Only the named ones are the ones that I had. These other ones were default already there. I didn't create these. So the ones with the names, if you follow along, here's some of the ranges that I used to make sure that they were not overlapping, so I was able to set up the peer connection. That's just images of the ranges. I move on. And this is, I did log in through the VMs. So the one on the right here is the private virtual machine, and the one on the left is the public. You can see here, this one's not able to make the request, and this one is. And that's just as a result of, you know, the security group setup and just the actual physical architecture of, or sorry, virtual architecture of how everything's arranged, you know, so it's just the private one just isn't going to have access. I was also able to go in through the Windows Defender firewall and see a list. So I'll show you here, actually. I did this on the VMs, but I don't have the VMs running anymore. You know, you can see, make sure, just double check all the inbound and outbound rules do kind of match up with what you set up, what I set up in the security groups. So I did that when I was on the VMs. I should have added a screenshot here. And then there's the access control list. After I did that, I was supposed to set up an alarm. So I set up an alarm following the same instructions that we had in a previous hands-on project with the in and out bound rules for network packets. You know, so I just set up a certain threshold, set it to 1 minute, and then I went back and did the ping command. And I did this with the -T flag, so that just continuously pings the Google IP address. I didn't use the DNS, I used the actual IP, which is 8.8.8.8. And then that would continuously make things until the alarm got triggered here, as you can see. Now, the deployment calculator. This was the final part of the Capstone project. As you can see here, this is my estimates. I set up, you know, the EC2 instances of compute. I set up the S3 bucket, all of my settings, set up the VPCs with their subnets and elastic IP. The only thing that I had issues with in this regard was the T2 and T3 series virtual machines with the EC2. So I did in this is not correct because my instances here are using the T3 medium series with Windows 2022. Now, In my actual deployment, what I'm trying to kind of mirror here in the calculation is the T2 micro. So this isn't correct. This is what it would be if I was using T3 medium series, but if I was using the T2 micro, this would be more accurate. The reason that I did use the T3 is because that was the only option I was given on AWS pricing calculator's website. For some reason, I just couldn't, I don't know what settings I put in wrong, I just was unable to find T2 micro. So yeah, that being said, that was my project. At the very end of this, it did state to take a lot of screenshots, fully documenting my entire deployment. I did that and added them to my Google Drive, which is over here in Cloud Foundations. I just added to Module 8. But this portion is not graded, so I just didn't add them to this document because I didn't want to blow the document since it's not required. That being said, this was Wyatt Pierce with Cloud Foundations SVAD150, and that was my capstone project presentation.